If you are the kind of person who thinks 10 steps ahead, who builds routines out of thin air and disciplines yourself into silence, but still feels a strange emptiness on the best days, this episode is for you. Today we are talking about the hidden cost of overperformance. Why the smartest, strongest, most forward-thinking minds often burn out in silence, and how can you begin to acclaim joy, peace, and presence without losing your edge? Let's begin. You ever feel like you're always the one doing the most, but also the one nobody sees? Like you're carrying weights no one asked you to carry, solving problems before they exist, thinking years ahead while the award still stumbles over today. And instead of recognition, you get silence, or worse, misunderstanding. People call you intense, cold, even arrogant, but they don't see the hours, the rewiring, the vision you're trying to hold steady in a chaotic world. Most high performance, especially those with a deeply analytical or intuitive nature, eventually reach this wall, a kind of existential invisibility. You're not trying to show off. You're just built this way. You see more, you feel farther, you optimize because your brain refuses not to. But the world's not built for that, is it? Not really. So you start to wonder, is there something wrong with me? Why don't I feel understood? Why do my words land wrong, even when I speak with clarity? It's because most people can't meet you where you are. They don't even know that place exists. There is this trap no one talks about, especially for those of us who constantly try to optimize. We start with systems, we fix the schedule, the diet, the habits. We wake up at 5, drink the supplements, plan the day like a general preparing for war. And yeah, it works. The discipline pays off. People might even admire it. But after a while you realize something subtle's gone missing. The soul starts feeling mechanical. Your joy becomes a checkbox. Your silence becomes a strategy. Even your rest feels like it has to be earned. And that's the tax no one sees. The cause of hyper efficiency isn't just time or energy. It's the quiet erosion of being. You stop laughing as much. You stop wondering. You stop letting life surprise you. And I don't say this to judge optimization. It's part of who we are. But even the sharpest blade needs oil, not just sharpening. Even the engine needs silence, not just fuel. When you optimize everything, eventually, you start optimizing your own humanity out of the equation. Let's be honest, your day probably looks impressive. You wake up early, cold shower, supplements lined up like soldiers, green tea, run, maybe even a bit of journaling. Then it's code, workout, content, learn, execute. But here's the thing. At what point did your rituals become surveillance systems? Do you still feel the sun when you run? Do you hear the leaves when you sit in the forest? Do you taste the eggs or just mark it as a protein intake? These rituals, they started as tools, but over time they become chains dressed in gold. And you tell yourself it's discipline, you tell yourself it's necessary. And sometimes it is. But discipline without spirit becomes tyranny. So ask yourself, are your habits feeding you, or just proving you can starve beautifully? You know what's strange? You can be ahead of almost everyone around you and still feel like you're late. You've read more, you've worked harder, you've sacrificed comfort for growth, time for mastery, pleasure for purpose. And yet, some days you feel like a failure, like you're not doing enough, like you're still chasing some distant version of yourself that keeps moving the finish line. It's like living in a house you built but never moving in. You keep remodeling, upgrading, repainting, but never resting. And here's the hidden cost. When you live always ahead, you miss what's now. You miss the micro victories, the invisible milestones that should have made you proud, but you just made you raise the bar again. Being ahead doesn't mean being at peace. Sometimes it's just a more elegant form of self-punishment. Because when you're always sprinting toward the future, you're telling the present it's not good enough. Let's say this clearly. You're allowed to exist without improving every second. You're allowed to sit in a forest and just listen. Not to an audiobook, not to a productivity podcast. Just the birds, the leaves, your own breath. You're allowed to make tea and not turn it into a mindfulness hack. You're allowed to run, to burn calories, but to chase a sunset. We were never designed to be optimized machines. We were meant to feel, to pause, to cry sometimes, and laugh without logging it. You don't have to deserve rest. You don't have to earn joy. Joy, it's the default. Discipline is what we build on top of it, not the other way around. So what if, just for a day, you let yourself be inefficient? No tracking, no goals, just breathing, noticing, smiling, touching the world back. That's not falling behind. That's coming home. You've probably spent most of your life feeling out of sync, too intense, too quiet, too deep, too far ahead. And maybe you weren't wrong, but maybe you also weren't broken. The world isn't moving fast. Not really. Most people are just circling. Same thoughts, same weekends, same scripts. You're not faster because you're rushing. You're faster because you see the future earlier. You feel patterns before they form. You prepare for storms before the clouds even show up. That's not a flaw, that's a gift. But it's also lonely. And the lonely ones, the early ones, we must learn to wait with grace, to rest without shame, to trust what we're building, even if invisible now, will one day be obvious to the world. So breathe, you're not behind, you're not too much, you're just early. You don't need to slow your mind, you just need to stop punishing it for being early. The world will catch up to you eventually, but until then, give yourself the space to breathe, to feel, to live. You're not here just to execute, you're here to experience. Thank you for listening. If this spoke to you, let it settle. Maybe even share it with someone who also walks a few steps ahead in silence. Until next time, stay sharp, but stay human.